Hi, welcome again to another show with Laura and myself. And today we have a very special guest to talk about an issue that we tend to keep under the table and not discuss. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura to introduce our guest.
We have a very interesting guest today who is a Fall River resident, Melanie Cadiero. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
She is going to talk about a topic that actually does not get talked about a lot. It's a topic that ravishes not only Fall River but the nation, and it's not talked about often. And she's here to discuss eating disorders and her own struggle with eating disorders. And Linda and I had talked that this is a very important topic to shed light on. This not only affects the adult community, but the younger community. And we wanted to bring her on to talk about her struggles, but then her triumph and what her adversity brought her and how she's overcome that. So welcome, Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you for
So nice to have you here.
Yes,
and I'm so happy that you're brave enough to come and tell your story in the hopes of helping others. And I was astounded to know that there is very few places, there is none actually here in the city, but the only two places that I found were in Providence. And that is astounding with the number of kids, mainly women, females versus males. I'm sure there are some males that struggle as well. But thank you so much for coming and being willing.
Thank you. And, I think you're right in that the closest treatments are in Providence, and that's really where most of my treatments were when I was younger. So my eating disorder began when I was 12 years old. I was in the 7th grade. And I think like how it starts with most women and some men is with self-esteem. And for me, I had just gone to my annual doctor's appointment, and I remember being on the scale, and for some reason, I thought that number was too high. And going home that day in the back seat of the car with my mom, I told myself I was gonna decrease this number. And how I was gonna do that was I was gonna put myself on a diet. And that's how I think with most people I was in treatment with, we all started out that way.
12 years old.
12 years old, so very young, and we're seeing it in young girls even younger now. I was in treatment with someone who was 10 at one point. So putting myself on a diet, what that looked like was just cutting down on foods everyone talks about are fattening. Ice cream, chips, snacks, things like that, fried food. So, but then, you start to see slow progress with weight coming off that way, and it starts to become an obsession. So cutting down just on a few foods became only a few foods I was actually eating. And with that came, weighing myself daily, not eating lunch at school, hiding food, and these are things that my friends at school started to notice and tell their parents. But it wasn't till about 4 or 5 months after I started this that I went on a family vacation, and that was the first time my parents really took notice was me in a bathing suit and realized a significant weight loss. I'd lost almost 20 pounds in about 5 months.
Wow. How about your clothes? Your clothes didn't really fit at that. Did you hide it in disguise and clothing?
Right, and that's something girls typically do, and men too as well, is you wear layers of clothing to hide that weight loss, and that was something I was doing. So in February when I was on that vacation and was only in a bathing suit, that was the first time I was really, exposing what my body had looked like at that point from all that dieting and exercise as well.
The pressures of, what do you think the pressures were for you at that young age? Well, you talked about your self-esteem that could have led to this. Was it peer pressures at school? Was it social media? I don't know if social media was big at that time. Was it TV? Where were your pressures coming from to be?
Sometimes it's just self-esteem.
I think it was just something innate in me. We're talking 2004, so
yeah, that's why I said I don't know.
Ago,
there really wasn't all of that.
It wasn't, and now you have celebrities that come out and talk about their own journeys. There is a lot of pressure on social media these days, so I can't imagine what girls that are 12 now are facing compared to what I was facing. For me, I was diagnosed with anxiety and OCD when I was 10, and I think just starting to diet, that became my next OCD that I really focused on. But the closest place, when I came back from that trip, my parents had found a specialist in Providence at Hasbro, and I remember the next week I had an appointment there, And within 30 minutes of being at the appointment, just got done with weight and vitals, the doctor came in and she told me, "You're not going home today. I'm admitting you." She passed me a brochure of the program on the 6th floor at Hasbro and said, "You have what's called anorexia nervosa." And that was the first time I ever heard that term. Going through what I was going through the months prior to that admission, I knew something was different about me. I knew what I was doing wasn't what my friends were doing, that it wasn't normal. It was a very dark place for me, not knowing what my behaviors were called. And being told that I actually had this and explained what this was really, shocking to me and my parents.
Yeah. You must have been so terrified, so brave and so terrified at the same time. I just can't imagine the feelings. What were your feelings at that time? Because you're now not having to stay at home?
Right, and that was the first time I was ever really out of the house besides a sleepover here and there, and I spent weeks in the hospital, followed up by 5 weeks in a partial program there as well. The feelings were just, I was scared, but also I didn't necessarily want to stop what I was doing because the way I felt when I felt thin, and that number meant so much to me on the scale. So it was definitely a very confusing time for me. And after that admission, I did experience about 8 months where I was doing pretty well. But then, like most people with an eating disorder, you experience relapse.
A relapse, yeah.
And from there, that kind of went on till I was about 16. And then I started, hanging out with friends in high school and doing really well in school, and that distracted me. So I did well until about 20, and 20 is where I really had a hard relapse, and that went from 20 to 26, where I ultimately have been recovered since 26. But during that time, and I think a lot of things that happen with girls that start with anorexia is that eventually you can't sustain that. You can't sustain all of that restricting and not eating. You have to eat, and it eventually turns into a different form of an eating disorder, and at that point I had become bulimic. And what that means for people that don't know is you're eating, you can be close to a normal weight, if not a normal weight, but you experience purging behaviors such as like vomiting or laxatives or over-exercise in order to rid those calories that you're eating.
So I think, why we wanted to bring you on so much is because your story is so amazing, and our young people today are struggling with this. You must see this. You must see these young people. We talked about just briefly about the stressors and the struggles they have with social media. Like everything is, well, first of all, everything is fake. Nothing's real on social media, anything. It's all, but these young people are seeing this, and I think now more than ever, it's such a, you're seeing eating disorders at a higher level. And what do you say? Your parents were great. At 12 years old, they got you right into treatment immediately. What are some of the signs that you would say, looking at an 11, 12, 13-year-old, I think it gets overlooked. I think people would think that that's too young to have that, but it's not. What are some of the initial signs that you would say a parent could look for, or even a young person?
Okay. I think before I even get to the signs, that is the age it usually starts. It usually starts in adolescent, and that's the time you want to catch it, because after 18 you can sign yourself in and out of treatment and out of the hospital. So that's really a crucial age to pick up on if someone has an eating disorder. Some of the signs just pertaining to myself is you notice they won't eat certain foods, that they become restrictive in what they're eating, that they're skipping meals, that they're hiding food, wearing layers of clothing, have a fascination with the scale, fascination with exercising, and just aren't their normal self. They're very low energy. They don't enjoy the things they normally enjoyed.
I think that you said something very interesting. You said that you were distracted during your teenage years. That's interesting to me. So can you elaborate on that a little bit? How did that help you in your periods of recovery, that having something to do, your friends? Tell me about that.
I think an eating disorder is usually accompanied by depression, anxiety. At least for me it was. And I think it's definitely a coping mechanism. It's that need to have some sort of control over your life. How people sometimes read a book, or they write, or they listen to music. The way you cope with your anxiety is by choosing what you eat and don't eat. And I think for me, being in high school and realizing that these things were kind of impacting how I was able to attend social events or participate in school, I chose that over my eating disorder at the time.
I think
But when you said too that catch it at a younger age, because at 18, then you can sign yourself out. So when you were 18, how many times were you able to sign yourself out, or did you ever sign yourself out?
Right, so I was in a period where I was good at 18, but at 20, when I hit that relapse hard, I was probably in and out of the hospital maybe 15 times each time I signed myself out. And I also started frequenting residential centers in Connecticut, in up near Boston and Belmont, Mass. I went to several, and I signed myself out every time I started to feel that lack of control. I wasn't ready to get better, but it was always against medical advice. It was always against my parents' and my family's wishes. They would tell me the risks of me signing myself out. And with an eating disorder, it's not just a mental illness, it becomes a physical illness. You experience a lot of, physical repercussions from what you're doing to your body. And it wasn't until I was 26 where I really started to recognize that I was doing a lot. I was experiencing kidney failure. They were telling me that I could potentially go on dialysis. I had seen a cardiologist. Every time I was being admitted, I was getting sent to the telemetry unit, which is for cardiac care. And then the summer before I decided to go to treatment that November, I had to stay at Rhode Island Hospital in the ICU. So I started to really recognize like my body is shutting down. And you experience electrolyte imbalances. My sodium potassium would be critically low. And that's mainly the reason for my admission every time I went to the hospital, were those imbalances. And I remember the weekend before, I had been in talks with the acute center in Denver. It was the only center that was going to take me because of how physically unwell I was. I was too much of a risk for residential centers.
So at that point, no residential centers
No.
that you tried to get into would even accept you because of being that critical.
Right.
And even to be in ICU. I mean, did you ever get the last rites, like things got that bad?
I had to sign some paperwork saying, who my proxy was going to be and things like that. I had written things down myself because I had come to the conclusion like I could die at any moment. So it was a very dark time for me. And I had been in talks with the acute for several weeks. They had told me they would have a bed for me, that this was the place I needed to be. But I really needed to make that decision for myself. Although my therapist was telling me to go, my parents were telling me to go, I needed to do that myself. And I'm a strong believer in, if you want to get better, just like with any addiction, you have to personally want to get better.
Yeah.
You can't do it for somebody else, you have to do it for you. And I also believe in hitting that rock bottom. And the weekend before I finally decided I was going to go, I was house sitting for my aunt, and I was alone for 3 days, just like in and out of consciousness, sleeping, running to the bathroom. I was so incredibly ill. And then that morning, I took a shower, and it just kind of like my vision went black. Like I started seeing spots. Next thing I know, I was on the floor. And that's really where I was like nervous that I was going to die from this. And did I want to die from this? I realized I didn't. So I made that call to my dad. I said, book the flights to Denver, we're going. And I called Q. I said, I'm going to take that bed. And that's,
I think you said something very powerful. I'm a psychotherapist by nature. That's what I do for work. And I think a lot of people don't understand is something that you said was that you have to want to get better. And I think for a lot of people, they want someone else to get better. They want them to get better, and they skirt. But you have to want it for yourself. There's got to be a part of you. And you came to that point in your life where you hit bottom. Everybody's bottom is different. And you hit bottom and you wanted to get better.
right.
Can you talk about that moment that you really decided, I want to get better? Was it a different treatment when you walked into that treatment than the other times, the previous times?
I don't think so. The treatment center, I'll always be grateful to the acute center and the staff and the doctor there. But I think what was different was me.
You were different.
What was different was me. I remember being in treatment before in Connecticut, and my roommate at the time, she said something very important in group that just stuck with me and stuck with me now. And she always said, you know, if this eating disorder took her, all she would have been was wasted potential. And those two words are just something, you know, that I realized I did not want to be wasted potential. And it was at the point where it was either live or die, and I chose to fight, so that's what I did.
And that, what a fight that is.
It was a fight. It was tough, but as soon as I got to acute, they rolled out a wheelchair, I sat in it, I said, I'm gonna let them do whatever they need to do.
And how long were you at that center for?
I was out there for a few weeks, and then when I came back, I went to a partial program outside of Boston, and then I continued with group therapy for about 6 months, and I'm still in individual weekly therapy.
So I'm just going to say, I think everybody needs therapy. I think everybody in the world should see a therapist. I'm a therapist. I've seen therapy. I mean, I think everybody needs therapy. So I think it's great. It's a little...
No, I agree. Personally, I think that you need to have therapy quite a few times in your life during adolescence and, you know, as you get older. I mean, I'm older now. There's different fears that you think about when you get older. And sometimes that can kind of work on you. And to go to a therapist and talk to a therapist about it, somebody, you know, unbiased to you, I think it's very healthy, to be honest. I think it's really
it's so healthy. Everybody has to offload.
What gets me is, here's a young lady from the city who's experienced this when there's no services around. Like many of these children that are in school, especially, you know, younger kids, that are in school, the teachers, the cafeteria workers are the ones that notice things. Some kids spend more time at school interacting with a teacher than they do at home with a parent, because by the time you get home and the parent, you know, you spend more hours a day. To utilize, you know, Melanie being able to go into a school when they have a professional day, sharing the story, because some teacher might notice something, help someone out. Some you know, young ladies groups that are around in the city, you know, to go out and to talk about this, because we could be saving people.
Do you think that, putting your 12-year-old self's hat on, do you think that having a peer at that time or someone that had gone through it that noticed something in you would have made a difference for you? What do you think about that?
I think it was under the radar for several months until one of my friends at school picked up on it, that I was throwing out my lunch, and then everyone started to take notice in how I was acting, and noticed the weight loss, noticed I wasn't playing at recess, noticed that I was a little more isolated. So I do think so.
I think your story is so important, not only for those young kids, but for the teachers, because I think a lot of times kids, you said it, like it was your friends that noticed something first. I think a lot of times that happens. Kids say something to their teacher or their guidance counselor about their friend, and it may not be taken seriously because kids are kids, and you know, so I think that your story, I mean, first of all, you're so brave to come on here and share your story and let people know that you struggle with this. I think a lot of times people don't want to say, they're either embarrassed or it's a very private thing for them, which is okay. But why are you willing to share your story?
So I think you're right in that it is a very shameful illness. It's something I didn't talk about till recently. I think the reason I decided to come on today is in the last several years, quite a few girls, women, have reached out to me on social media. They found my story on the acute center. I had a testimonial on there. And they reach out to me letting me know their story is very similar to me. They want to know how I got better because they want that for themselves. And I think to see somebody else who has been able to get through it is really important.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I would sometimes go online and research, trying to read about how somebody got better, to know somebody else was able to get through this, and that this isn't something that you have to have for the rest of your life, that there's someone you can talk to who understands is so important.
Have you ever thought about writing a book or writing your story down? Do you think about that?
I do think about it, and I think somewhere down the line I would consider it.
I think you should.
Thank you.
I think you should. And so I wrote a children's book. It was based off a personal story in my own life, and I did it because there wasn't enough issues to talk about with that. So I said, well, I'll write a children's book about it for these children. So I think that your story is so needed, and that writing it down is not only cathartic for you, but also can help so many people. This is this is great, but I think that you're right, and just how you were looking for ways to help. Like, how can I get help? Who's been there before? Who's gone through this before? And you grasp for those things. I think that young women are, and men struggle with this as well. People don't think that. Do you remember seeing men in the treatment settings that you went to?
I had 3 different men that I was in treatment with. I keep in touch with one of them, and I'm not really sure what the difference with their experience, being a male is, but I know that it does exist in them because I've seen it.
Yeah.
And I think for them it's even more isolating because there's not a lot of numbers of men who have eating disorders, and it's something they don't really talk about, but it is prevalent in men as well.
Do you think that the way media projects people being thin and models, and that has an impact as well, or not really? Because
absolutely, and I feel that's probably why the numbers are on the rise. Is everyone feels this need to look and act a certain way, and I know sometimes even in my recovery, I'm online and I see somebody and I'm like, well, I wish I looked like that, or I wish I dressed like that, but then you come back to reality that's not reality.
Yeah. It's not.
Stay grounded in that.
It's sad. The world it's such a fake world that we live in at times, with what's portrayed on social media, what's portrayed online, to be real, which it's not. It's not real. I have 3, so your story is so important to me because I have 3 daughters, 1 son, and they are young and they grew up in this world of Instagram and Instagram photos and editing, and it's scary being a mom for young people this age to have this stature to live up to, and to hear your story. And the best part about your story is that you're in remission, and that there is hope. There is hope. I mean, so many people have issues of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, addictions, and they feel like it's a hopeless situation.
Yeah.
And it's not.
But I don't think it's just the anorexic or the bulimic. But there are like 12 different types of eating disorders. There's some people that eat constantly all day long, or they eat large quantities. They have trouble developing relationships, keeping relationships. They go from one friend to another to another. That's another form, and that's probably self-esteem and depression and all of that going with it. And honestly, with lots of kids being home, this COVID years, where they've kind of been isolated, has also, everybody's gotten that extra poundage on from being home, that I see that there's more kids today that have issues with eating than before even, and I think it's important that we get that out there. We do this show to try to highlight positive things, and you, my friend, are just a very positive person. And it's not only the successes she's had with this, but the kindness in her heart. We've talked about, and she was at a hair salon and this lady came in to do her hair, but the woman could only afford to come in every couple of months. So when she left, she paid for 5 additional hair days, salon days for this lady. The lady has no idea who paid for them, but that she has 5. That's the kindness in her heart. And that's what really sparks me in loving her the way I do, because I think all she said, we had a good conversation yesterday, and I mean, it brought tears to my eyes after that. You are such a wonderful person, and do so much in the community and care so much about others.
You're gonna make
I know, I know, I feel the same way. I was going to cry too.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for being able to come out. This show, if it helps one person, we've done something. You know, if we can all help one person, it really makes a difference. We only have 4 more minutes left. Is there anything else that you want to add to
I
this?
just want to say thank you so much for letting me come on here, and that if you hear back that anybody has a child, a friend, family member who needs someone to talk to, I'm more than happy to.
Very good.
We are.
We will do that. That's a really good thing to have. And we're going to try to get people who want you to come in. I know some of the schools have different groups with kids, and there's a few that I think it would be great for you to meet with those young ladies, Boys and Girls Club too. There's a lot.
Thank you. We really appreciate your willingness to come on here, your bravery and your strength. It just, it is a positive story. So thank you so much.
And everything that you've been through, your family suffers along with you as well, because they just want the best for you. So, you know, you're very blessed to have such a supportive family. You're blessed in many, many ways, and we are so blessed to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.